I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, I have a brand new guest on. I mean, forget about this Matt Lauer and these sex scandals and all this stuff that doesn't really make a two nickels worth of difference to the average American. Who I have on now is a PhD in economics. He specializes in public finance, government budgets. He is Dr. Mark Skidmore. Dr. Mark Skidmore, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg. I'm really glad to be on your show.
You're at Michigan State University.
Yes.
Just a little background for you. You are an expert in public finance. You have done a deep dive on what Catherine Austin Fitts has been talking about for years, about all this missing money, all these missing transactions, unauthorized transactions. You know, say what you will. She had said, $6 trillion, $9 trillion, and you were out to prove her wrong. And you use government documents, government accessible links on the internet, all the stuff that anybody could do, but you had to know what you know to do this, to find out a big wad of transactions and monies that really is unauthorized. 21 trillion, the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Defense, HUD and the DOD. Tell me about your story. How did you get into doing this kind of work? I mean, you got 21 trillion dollars of transactions that you don't know how they happened and who authorized them.
Well, I would say my story kind of really goes back to the financial crisis. You know, after all of that had happened, I wanted to take some time and back up, and there was so much that was unknown through traditional media sources, et cetera, and I just thought, I have to find some other ways of getting authentic, credible information. And so I learned about your show, for example, and just started doing more homework. And anyway, as part of that, I got to know a little bit about Catherine Austin Fitts' work. And I think most of your audience knows that she's the former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And has had some really interesting and really awful experiences that I think is worthwhile for your readers to know about. And you can read about her, and I'll give you the source documents for some of the resources that we've collected regarding the missing money, as well as some more information about her website. But in short, last June, I was listening to an interview with Catherine, and she referred to a report that had come out in 2016 by the Office of the Inspector General, and the charge of the OIG office is to provide some accountability and tracking of financial activity of the federal government. And so she had referred to a report that indicated in fiscal year 2015 that the Army, which has about $122 billion budget, had $6.5 trillion in adjustments. And I'm familiar with state and local budgets. I've taught budgeting processes to new county commissioners. And I know that things happen within government that, sometimes it's not always up and up, or sometimes you have an adjustment just because you don't have adequate transactions, so the auditor, receipts, etc. And so the auditor will just say, you know what, this is an unsupported adjustment. We have to account for this. And usually it's just a small portion of authorized spending, maybe 1% at most. So for the Army, 1% would be about $1.2 billion of transactions that you just can't account for. You don't have adequate documentation. So when she said 6.5 trillion, I said, that cannot be right. It doesn't even, it's not even in the realm. I thought maybe she meant 6.5 billion. And that would be a lot of money of unaccountable transactions. So I went and looked up the report myself and started reading it, and sure enough, it was 6.5 trillion. And I thought, what? How can this be? And so I started digging in, and I decided to send her a note and ask whether it would be useful to have a couple of graduate students take some time and sift through the thousands of OIG reports. So we agreed that we would work together on this, and we spent the summer sifting through thousands of reports, trying to identify the reports that indicate an unsupported journal voucher adjustment amount. there are many reports that say there were adjustments, but for public consumption, it didn't really say very much. And there's always a reference to an official accounting statement or report or audit report that is available. I have a FOIA request, for example, that's for a couple of these reports. I'm hoping that they will send them to me at some point. But anyway, so she was right, and we dug in and pulled all of the documents that we could find, and it's an incomplete list. We decided to go back to 1998 because there were some changes in the financial disclosure laws at the federal level that occurred in the 90s that Catherine was a part of, helping to implement. And so we went from 98 through 2015. At that time, that was the most recent available reports. And we did it for HUD and DOD. And in sometimes it wouldn't be for DOD as a whole. You'd find it in Army or Navy or Air Force. And so this is incomplete. And we found 21 trillion of adjustments over that whole period. The biggest chunk is for the Army. We were able to find 13 of 17 years, and we found about 11.5 trillion just for the Army.
Could this be money? Could some of this money just be squirreled off to other projects and other budgets and other people? And they say they have a dark space program. We have DARPA. We have weapons programs. We have national security stuff. Could this stuff just be whisked away to spend stuff on that the Congress doesn't even know about?
These reports don't really say much about that at all. Of course, it's very possible that money could be used for other purposes, or we could take some guesses, and others who are on the inside might have a more informed guess than I do. My take on it is whatever it is, these reports suggest that there's something really wrong in the budget process, right? Even if you don't think there's something nefarious going on, something that's not good or very hidden in a dark project or money laundering or fraud, if you don't believe any of that stuff, how can you do a proper kind of a program evaluation with these kinds of numbers? You just can't. It's like, where did this money come from? What was it used for? How do we account for this? And so from my point of view, it's very non-transparent, and the Constitution says that all spending needs to be approved by Congress. And from my teaching of local government finance and budgeting processes, we always say, well, if some sort of governing authority that's elected by the people approves a certain amount of revenues and expenditure allocations, and you stick with that. And if you go outside of that, you have to come back to the governing body and ask for approval for these changes. And it appears from these documents that that's not happening. It looks like there's a whole lot of money flowing in and money flowing out. And I can give some examples of that.
One of the things you told me in the pre-interview, which was fascinating, that you said the Army's budget's $2 billion, and you said that you found a transfer from the Treasury for $800 billion to the Army. What is that, six-fold of what their own budget? It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. So maybe what I can do first, and I'll talk about these examples as soon as I do this, but I just want to give your listeners a formal definition of what an unsupported journal voucher adjustment is. Okay? So I'm just going to read it. Journal vouchers are summary level accounting adjustments made when balances between systems cannot be reconciled. Often these journal vouchers are unsupported, meaning they lack supporting documentation to justify the adjustments or are not tied to specific accounting transactions. For an auditor, journal vouchers are a red flag for transactions not being captured, reported, or summarized correctly. And this comes from our own Office of the Comptroller. Okay, so in the private sector, you might see journal voucher adjustments on the revenue side. If it's a for-profit, you could have money flowing in for which you don't have adequate documentation for, and you could have money flowing out for which you don't have adequate documentation. And so at the end of the day, you might have these adjustments, at the end of your balance sheet or whatever your financial statement is, that says there's these adjustments. and they're
In other words, you try to balance the incoming money with the outgoing money and account for where it came and where it went. But you're not seeing this with the government.
You know, Catherine mentions this. It's like on your checkbook, you have some money that flew out, and you know the bank says you have this much, and you think you have this much, and so you write an adjustment at the end and say, well, I've got to reconcile this. I don't know where the money went, but here, this is, you know, I want to balance my account. That's what this is, sort of. You know, very in
excellent, simple thing. Yes.
So with the public sector, these adjustments would primarily be on the expenditure side because you need proper transactions. I receive grant funding for the work I do at the university, and whenever we have work done or we do research or we conduct programming and efforts, we have to have receipts for the expenditure, the travel, etc. And so it's a very transparent process, and if I don't have adequate documentation, they'll come back to me and ask for it. So when somebody says you have these huge amounts of money, it doesn't square with my experience with federal government grants or what happens in the public sector and local governments at all. And furthermore, as you had mentioned, in this one report that indicates this huge amount of 6.5 trillion, there's an appendix table that indicates that there was a transfer from Treasury to the Army of about 800 billion. That's almost $1 trillion of money flowing in. There's a note saying, well, we had to do this in order to reconcile past years, but that doesn't make sense to me either, because these earlier years you have a transfer from Treasury to the Army of your 120 or 130 billion dollars, and every year the Army is granted the authority to spend this money in the ways they say they will. Well, how can you get 800 billion in and call that an adjustment? I've tried to call and contact the Office of the Inspector General to really talk to the people who helped develop these reports, and I haven't been successful in actually talking to somebody who knows about these reports. And then I sort of stopped trying when they disabled the links to all of the reports that we had identified.
No, wait, I want to talk about that. That's that ding, 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 ding. Well, excuse me. So you're saying that you start getting on the phone. Hi, this is Dr. Mark Skidmore at the Michigan State University. And I'd like to have somebody explain 800 billion or whatever the appendix here. And I found this on these links. And the next thing you know, they just took all the links that you used, all the public information, clip, ding, ding, cut it off. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, from the best I can tell, all the key documents that indicate the size of the adjustments from year to year and DoD have been disabled. So you can no longer access those reports from the government website. You can only get them at solari.com, where we reposted them because we downloaded all of the documents.
I love it. So what does that tell you when somebody? I mean, you're not like some paper boy. I mean, to me, you're an expert in public finance with a PhD in economics, with graduate level students helping you go through this, and you're like, wow. Does this pass the smell test when you add everything up, the trillions of dollars that you can't account for, and you make a couple of phone calls and they disable the links? Does this pass the smell test?
Well, not to me. I don't feel sad. I mean, I've been able to talk with a few people. I tried calling the Congressional Budget Office. I talked with somebody at the GAO, and then one or two people at the Office of the Inspector General, but I haven't been able to talk to anybody who's actually been involved in generating these reports. So it ends up being a very general discussion. At one point I was having a conversation and I said, does this, I think it was at the GAO, and I asked, does this make sense to you? How can it be that we have adjustments of 6.5 trillion on a budget of 120 billion? Isn't this a red flag? Shouldn't we be looking at this? And the person said, yeah, it's a lot of money. It seems so strange, but you know what? If there was something really wrong, we would be having a congressional hearing about this, and the higher levels would be looking at it. And I thought that was kind of circular logic. Isn't it the GAO and the OIG that drives this? And why isn't it that we look at this? And I think you know this as well as some of your listeners, but Donald Rumsfeld on September 10th, 2001, publicly acknowledged that the DoD had lost track of or couldn't account for $2.3 trillion, and back then it was a notable acknowledgement, a public acknowledgement that something was wrong.
This was, just so everybody knows, they get on the right page here. This is the day before 9/11 in 2001. We lost $2.3 trillion. Now, I know that 9/11 knocked every story out of the box, but nobody came back to, oh, by the way, we lost $2.3 trillion officially. This is the head of the Department of Defense saying we don't know where $2.3 trillion is, and yet they will argue and fight and complain and go to war over this stupid $85 billion sequester, but you don't care where $2.3 trillion went.
And $85 billion is a lot of money by any standard.
Relative to $2.3 trillion, let me use your numbers for the Army, $6.5 trillion in adjustments. That's just the Army, and then for you find, and you are a PhD level expert in public finance, government budgets, and you find $21 trillion just in two departments. DOD and Housing and Urban Development. We have a $20 trillion, they tell us, deficit, but yet nobody cares where $21 trillion has been spent or is gone or we've been stolen or who knows what happened to it.
Yeah, it's a big question. Why don't people want to look at this? Is there some reason that we don't take a closer look? In my view, I can't say. I'm, a blue-collar, hard-working economist at Michigan State University, and I'm saying this doesn't make sense to me. Why don't we look at this? Even if we were to spend $100 million pulling together, a small army of independent auditors to transaction by transaction, just kind of have a look and see.
$100 million relative to $21 trillion.
Yeah. Even if it were $100 million, it would, in my mind, be worthwhile finding out where the flow of money. Accounting is just, in principle, it can be complex, but in principle, it's money flowing in and money flowing out. We should be able to know what that looks like. And if the Army or the DoD is unable to kind of show us or help us see, we also know that the Federal Reserve, it acts as the fiscal agent for the federal government. So all transactions ultimately flow through the Fed. I think if we wanted to, we could see the flow of resources through the Fed.
You told me that you were going to come up with a list of things that you do know for sure. What would that list of things that you do know for sure? And let's start with, for sure, they can't account for $21 trillion in just two departments going back from 2015 to 1998. Is that right? Let's start there.
Yeah, that's the first thing. We know from official government sources that indicate that $21 trillion are in some way unaccounted for. We can't, and furthermore, again, if we come back to the Constitution, all spending needs to be authorized by Congress. It looks to me, this is another thing I think I can conclude with a fair degree of certainty, that there's money flowing in as well as out that's unaccounted for. And the $800 billion appears to be, they call it an unsupported adjustment from, and it's a transfer from Treasury to the Army. So there's money flowing in, money flowing out in some way. That's one thing we know from these government documents, 21 trillion in unaccounted funds. The second thing we know is that for anybody who cares to read them, these reports are not at all transparent. They're opaque. So it's very, it'll say there are, for example, there are missing records, thousands of missing, not just missing, but appear to be erased records. But there's no indication of how much money would be associated with those records that we can't see. It just stops. Similarly, the one report for the Army at $6.5 trillion, it'll say something like there were 170 unsupported journal voucher adjustments that account for $2 trillion. And then it stops. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, the next step would be to go into those 100, maybe there are tranches of adjustments in those 170, but 170 doesn't seem like that many to look into. Why don't we go and look? But it stops.
Stunning.
Right? So it's not transparent. At some higher level government official authorized the disabling of all the links to the key documents. We know that.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing. Woo! And you have downloaded those facts on Solari.com. So anybody that wants to check your work, you can go to Solari.com.
You can go to Solari.com, click on the front page. There's a place where you can click on, it's called Missing Money. And you could go in and get all the original source documents. What we did is highlight the page number that the unsupported adjustments are highlighted in. You can get all of that information. And if you have a background in accounting or bookkeeping, please look at it. We need your help. Right? Does this make any sense to you? And in addition to that, there's all kinds of other information that I think is useful for providing context to these unaccounted for monies. Okay, so it looks like we have money flowing in, money flowing out. We also have reports that say in these government documents that we have inadequate computing systems, systems that don't talk with one another. That was one of the things that Rumsfeld noted back in 2001 for why we lost this money or couldn't account for it. We have systems that don't talk to one another. We have incompetence at some level. We have explanations of erased records or computing error, inadequate audit trails, writing off obsolete. I've talked with people who say, well, it might be that we've written off obsolete equipment, etc., and you have to value that, and so that's why.
And they are not. You're not saying they're incompetent. They are admitting they're incompetent.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
They are admitting it.
Yeah, that's what they're
self-admit
suggesting.
They're incompetent.
Now, my experience with people within the federal government, that is not the case.
I'm with you, my friend. They're not that stupid. No way.
No, they are not. They're very sharp. And many of them care about what's going on and want to do a good job. That's my personal experience. So this idea, I'm sure that there are some level of people who aren't as competent as they could be, but there are many competent people, and typically those people are the ones who are appointed to positions of responsibility. But that's what these reports say. And
that's unbelievable. Wow, we lost $21 trillion and we're just stupid. I mean, that's just what they're saying. That's unbelievable. We could pay off, if we knew where that money went in and out, we might be able to pay off our $20 trillion worth of national debt, that they keep cramming down our throats and exploding.
It's a possibility. It's, for me, it's like, how can we have these kinds of adjustments and these, and this massive amounts of money? It doesn't make sense to me. And that's why I was willing to step up and say, you know what, let's just ask some questions. If it doesn't happen at the administrative level and it doesn't happen at the legislative level, then in a representative democracy, in my mind, it comes back to us to try to put as much pressure as we can to look at this. If we don't do it, it really falls back on us.
And have you been threatened? Have people called you and said, hey, knock it off? Hey, what are you doing?
No.
Have you? No, you haven't? Okay. All right. And do you have more on your list of what you do know?
Those are the key things that I think we can know from what we have found so far. I can, if there's time, I can talk about some scenarios. What I try to do is, in my mind, try to see if any of these are real possibilities. Like, is it possible that it's just computer systems that don't talk to each other, so you end up with double counting? And just as a quick example, if you take 11 trillion of unsupported adjustments from the Army, divided by 120 trillion roughly per year, every year,
120 billion
per year, you'd have to have, each transaction counting, like 10 times, going back and forth and back and forth. And that doesn't seem to make sense to me.
And can I ask you a few questions now, and just ask you a few, and just give me your quick answer to what you think, your opinion. It's not. We're just going to get your analysis as somebody who, does big budgets in public finance for a living. I mean, you study this. Do you think that the possibility for fraud is big?
I cannot discount it. Absolutely, I think it's possible that there's fraud. It's very possible. In fact, I reference a journal article that says whenever you have a significant amount of unsupported journal vouchers, that's a red flag for fraud, whether it's private or public. That's not just me. It's, in the literature. And, so is it possible? Absolutely.
All right, next question. Do you think Congress, some people in Congress, especially the top people, they have to know this is going on? They're the ones that appropriate money. They have to know. You can't have 21 trillion from 2015 to 98 in just two departments. I mean, years ago, I remember a story from the Department of Education. They lost $2 trillion. They lost it. Don't know where it went. I mean, this is just two departments. This is the entire amount of all the government, incompetence, as they want to say themselves. Do you think Congress knows about this? At least some people in Congress know about this.
I'm sure of it. I think people have been around for a long time and were there when Rumsfeld admitted to the 2.2 trillion. So I think some people have some sense of awareness, and I haven't talked to anybody specifically about it within Congress. At some point, I would like to do that.
Okay.
Just to get a sense for what people think.
When a guy like you does public finance, does this frighten you to your core that things are so whacked out, this could be a national security issue?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I decided to look at this. It's like, how can this be? And what does it mean? If money are flowing, trillions of dollars are flowing in and flowing out, it appears to be outside of our Constitution and outside of the rule of law. And if that's the case, then, that really is troubling, right? Because it suggests that there's a layer of things happening that are outside the rule of law. And I know that, for example, some activities, just for the sake of the protection of people involved and for national security, has to be, in a sense, black budget. There's always stuff like that, but usually it's authorized spending, and some percentage is this black budget. They're doing things, but only very few people in the security arena and within Congress know about it.
I understand that.
But this is way outside of that, right? It appears to be outside of that. So I'm worried about it.
And you think it's a national, you put your PhD hat on, you think it's a national security issue. You would consider this kind of wackadoodle, you cannot do any kind of a study, a cost analysis. You would say this could threaten the democracy of the United States of America.
Yeah, I think if it's outside the rule of law, and the law says we need to have a proper financial accounting and all spending needs to be authorized by Congress, it looks to me like there's something else happening, and that's troubling.
I'm going to leave it there, Dr. Mark Skidmore. I'm going to put do you have a website at the University of Michigan? If people contact me, can I give them your email, at least contact you?
Yeah.
There are going to be people contacting me about this.
Yeah, you could give them my email, which you have.
Yeah, I have, but I'm not going to give it out to the public. I'm just going to see if there's someone. I'm going to make sure that you get. What I'll do is I'll pass it along. And you don't have your own personal website at the.
Yeah.
You do. You do.
I do have a web page in the Department of Economics, also in Agriculture, Food, and Resource Economics, so you could get information about me there.
I'll link to that page. I'll also link to the Solari report because you and Catherine
Yeah,
Austin Fitz team.
I think that's the primary place where people would want to go, because that's where these reports are.
And the government you guys were smart enough to say, hey, we better get all this stuff because they may cut this off someday. And you guys got it all, the whole ball of wax, and stuck it on
Yeah.
Catherine. Oh,
Yeah,
man, that is smart. You didn't think they were going to, did you think they were going to shut this off?
No, I did not. I didn't
Wow.
think so. So it really shook me up when, I had a friend of mine who has an accounting background as well as a background in public finance, and he's a dean at a major business school here here in the United States. And I said, will you please look at this, because this does not make sense to me. Are we asking the right kinds of questions? And he came back to me in an email and just said, yeah, the size and magnitude of these kinds of adjustments for any reason at any time is cause for concern. And then at the end, he said, oh, by the way, I tried to link on the government report, and the government website must have been down or something because the link didn't go through. And so that's how I learned that all of the links were disabled. We went through and looked at all the original links, and all of the key reports had been disabled.
And
so it really,
are,
that bothered me.
And all the links are still down. I mean, they have they're not just a glitch or whatever. All the links are disconnected.
Yeah, they've been disconnected for some time now.
All right. Well, listen, Dr. Mark Skidmore, PhD in economics, expert in public finance. I really appreciate you coming on and drilling down. I mean, the interview started out a little slow, but oh my gosh, when you start listening to what you're saying, I mean, I'm just like, and your explanations, accounting-wise, unbelievable. I mean, of course, the big story is the sexcapades of all the celebrities, Matt Lauer, John Conyers, whoever of but $21 missing trillion, not a story. Numbers, I always used to say, if my colleagues in the mainstream media, ooh, numbers. They just can't do numbers. I mean, it's just
the numbers are so large, it's hard to imagine. 21 trillion is equivalent to about $65,000 per person in America. So when you start thinking about billions, a million is 1,000 billion, and a billion is 1,000 trillion. For me, I have to put it in some terms that I can understand, and so I try to convert per person.
Wait, say that again. A billion is 1,000 million. A trillion is 1,000 billion.
Wow. So it's hard to imagine how much money we're talking about, right?
It's a lot.
It's $65,000 per person.
Unbelievable. Dr. Mark Skidmore, wonderful interview. Thank you for coming on. Even though the information isn't what we all want to hear, we all want to know that we're doing great. But thanks for coming on and explaining to me what kind of problems that we have in our government and budget process that you can't even make sense of. Dr. Mark Skidmore, you are a professor at the Michigan State University, and thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg.